Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is one of the coolest and most successful franchises of all time. To this day, the concept of this series just baffles me. Like, I would love to see the pitch for this series. So, it's ninjas who are turtle mutants, and they're teenagers too. They were named after Renaissance artist by their master of Kung Fu, who's a giant rat in the sewers of New York. There's also a metal samurai guy who argues with a talking brain creature, like some old married couple. And we'll throw in a girl in a yellow jumpsuit for good measure. And pizza. And it works! To a staggering degree does it work, and the concept has taken many forms over the years. Comics, cartoons, clothes, lunchboxes, toys, and of course, movies, both good and bad. And to no one's surprise, there are TmnT video games. A lot of them. I recall playing the 1989 NES game at my sister's gymnastics studio. She didn't, own the studio. She went there to, practice. I remember seeing the TV in the little corner of the area. There was a NES there, it had the game, and gosh, to fight the children over the controller and to play the game itself. Good times. I also played the arcade game when I was a kid, which was much better. But recently, there was a new entry into the TmnT gaming library, Shredder's Revenge. For me, it's been nearly 2 decades since I played a TmnT game, and according to Tom and our friend Jax, who is a legit authority when it comes to all things TmnT, seriously, go check out his comprehensive video about the franchise. Apparently, I've been missing out. So, I was excited to join them for Shredder's Revenge and see what the fuss was all about. For the record, I'm a bit of an outsider here who knows enough about the TmnT franchise, but I wouldn't consider myself a die-hard fan by any means. Also, I'm rather inexperienced when it comes to the side-scroller, beat-em-up genre of gaming. So Shredder's Revenge might catch me off guard both for its gaming mechanics and how it utilizes the lore of TmnT. Is Shredder's Revenge a love letter to a classic franchise, and also the gaming genre? Well, let's find out. When it comes to writing videos, I typically do an origin section about the topic in order to provide some context and background. But TmnT is a monster of a subject, so I'm going to only focus on the bullet points here. Again, I highly recommend Jax's video as it touches on multiple aspects of the TmnT franchise. Just know that TmnT was created by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, and was initially a comic back in 1984, and reached even greater heights with its 1987 cartoon series. Ever since, the TmnT franchise has remained evergreen, with multiple cartoon generations, toys, movies, and, you guessed it, video games. Shredder's Revenge was developed by Tribute Games and was published by Dotemu. Tribute itself is located in Montreal and features devs who had previous experience at Ubisoft, specifically Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game. Appropriate, since that too was a side-scroller beat-em-up, so this wasn't Tribute's first rodeo. Shredder's Revenge was released on June 16, 2022, and is available on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and the Switch, which was my choice of console for playing the game. So, what's TmnT Shredder's Revenge about? The story is pretty simple, but is packed with plenty of TmnT lore and Easter eggs. The Turtles and their friends are pursuing Bebop and Rocksteady, who are gathering technology and whatnot for Shredder and Krang. No doubt, this old married couple are up to something, and it's up to the TmnT to put a halt to these villains. Leonardo, Donatello, Michelangelo, Raphael. The gang's all here as playable characters, which also includes Master Splinter, April O'Neil, and Casey Jones. The setting features, unsurprisingly, New York City. The sewers, the streets, the rooftops, you get the idea. We also get to check out Dimension X. As far as the game itself goes, I personally had a few gripes. For the record, I am what you would consider a casual gamer, while Tom, who will share his thoughts here in a minute, is more hardcore and informed. Just think of this review as two perspectives from two different types of gamers. So for me, I instantly love the visuals and the energy of the game. The designs, the personality, the music, the voice acting, the characters, just all of it. But it was the gameplay where I struggled the most. Now, I say struggle. I was able to beat the game, but there were moments where I was frustrated. I mainly played as Donatello, and I enjoyed his range and power. But these flying bad guys? Oh god, did I hate those guys. There were also moments where I felt like I couldn't properly dodge the attacks of bad guys or even engage them. I'm ashamed to admit that I mostly tanked mobs and bosses and just brute forced my way through the game. Now, does that mean I'm a bad player who just needs to get good? Maybe, probably. But listen to what Tom has to say, because we both share the same opinion, but he puts it in a much more eloquent way.
The presentation of this game clearly harkens back to the classic TmnT beat-em-up games like the arcade original, Turtles in Time on the Super Nintendo, and to a lesser extent for all us Genesis fanboys, Hyperstone Heist. The sprite work in this game is absolutely gorgeous, with fluid, dynamic animations for both the player characters and all the enemies. The extent the team went in particular with the Foot Clan, giving them tons of unique animations for each level, having them interact with the environment before dropping what they're doing and attacking you. Effectively, it doesn't change much in the game, but it breathes so much more life into what essentially boiled down to a bunch of recolored ninjas. Identifying enemies, characters, and interactable items from the background is simple due to the game using bold colors and strong outlines for all these elements, while static background pieces are softer pastel colors with no outlines at all, emulating the look of cel-shaded characters against painted backgrounds most 2D animation employs. This attention to detail extends beyond the sprite work too. Even the music uses a lot of the same synths and audio motifs that set the soundtrack for specifically Turtles in Time, apart from other games on the SNES. Just like its work in the visuals, Shredder's Revenge goes a long way towards expanding the moveset of the Turtles from the aforementioned games, while also streamlining the gameplay and progression from its arcade roots, where the point of those games was primarily to siphon as many quarters out of young, wide-eyed TmnT fans as possible. Here, the Turtles all play slightly differently, with each character having the same basic controls, but the moves working slightly differently, like Mikey being able to bounce off enemies with his jump attack, for instance. The main story mode also saves your progress from level to level, a far cry from classic brawlers needing to be completed in a single sitting, although they do include an arcade mode if you want to go old school and try and 1cc the entire game. The Turtles also have a much wider moveset. Basic chain combos, jump attacks, and super moves are all here, but Shredder's Revenge adds a stock of charges for super moves that are built by landing attacks and filling a meter that grants charges to be stockpiled for when you need them most, which can be super clutch for evening the odds against some of the later bosses in the game. Every enemy you defeat gains you experience, and each character automatically levels up throughout the campaign to add extra moves, additional health, and more charges for super moves when you hit XP goals. Add in a dodge roll with some iframes, multiple throw styles, and a dedicated rising attack to better deal with flying enemies, and you have a much more diverse range of options for handling threats than your typical Turtles fare. As fun as the game is, and don't get me wrong, it is very fun, issues persist, some that are specific to this game and others that have plagued this genre since its inception. One of the things that's an issue with every one of these isometric, I think they're called isometric, the design's not really isometric or orthographic. If someone knows what the actual term for the kind of way they display the backgrounds in these games, let me know in the comments, because I'm not exactly sure. But for lack of a better term that I know, isometric beat-em-up games have an issue with the presence of flying enemies. Like all classic beat-em-ups, Shredder's Revenge is 2D, but fakes a third dimension with a sort of isometric background art, and fakes Z-depth by moving character sprites up and down the screen. This is the basis for combat. You have to be properly vertically aligned with an enemy, otherwise you'll be in front or behind them and your attack will miss. This system works great for enemies that are on the ground like you are, but it becomes trickier when enemies are flying, since in order for these enemies to appear like they're flying, they have to be higher up vertically on the screen. But this is also how you move backwards in space as well. Therefore, you run into this issue where it's far more difficult to judge a flying enemy's position relative to yourself, so attacks against flying enemies can end up missing far more than you'd like. As with most of these kinds of games, Shredder's Revenge attempts to compensate for this by having flying enemies cast a shadow on the ground to represent where they are relative to other land-bound enemies, but this can still lead to a bit of confusion. I think the developers were confident that the rising attack would be enough to handle this problem, so there were much more flying robot enemies in Shredder's Revenge than most beat-em-up games would dare to add. But I don't think the team's solution quite sticks the landing, making these enemies a bit more annoying to fight than they should be. More frustrating though, I've been trying to figure out exactly why this game sometimes just feels a bit awkward to play. The game isn't hard on normal difficulty, and I only lost all of my lives and had to restart a level once, but even while I was still doing decently well, there are just lots of tiny moments where it feels like you're getting hit where you shouldn't, or that you don't have full control of your character. There are a couple different reasons as to why this might be. The issue could be any or a combination of all of these observations. The simplest is that sometimes it just feels like enemies take hit priority when they shouldn't. If I'm doing a drop kick and the foot ninja attacks the air, I feel like my attack should take priority in this trade, but oftentimes it doesn't. Situations like this pop up all the time, where in the middle of one of your attack animations, an enemy will attack as well, and it will override your already in motion too late to cancel attack animation. The dodge roll, while a nice addition, is a bit more limiting than how it tends to work in other games. You can only roll in one dimension, forward and back. And the roll's distance is pretty far, and there's a fairly long recovery after it completes, which means you'll often roll backwards or forwards away from one enemy or projectile and directly into another one. It's not a catch-all damage avoider, it's very situational. I understand not having the dodge be 8-way or even 4-way, since in these games vertical alignment is the key to receiving damage. Being able to move vertically with iframes would essentially break the game, but dodging often causes just as many problems as it solves when you're coming to grips with the nuances of enemy attacks. Both of these issues stem from what I feel is the main contributing factor to this frustration though. Many enemy attacks have very weak tells. It's game design 101 for enemy attacks to have tells, or wind-up animations that visually clue the player that an attack is coming, allowing them to respond appropriately. Many enemies in Shredder's Revenge have short, if non-existent tells for their attacks, meaning there's only a handful of frames, if that, before an attack can damage you. Attacks with under 12 frames of wind-up are almost impossible for the human brain to react to, so this can lead to a lot of damage that feels unavoidable. Bosses make this issue even worse because, unlike common enemies, they usually don't stagger when hit, so your attacks don't interrupt what they're doing, and they can still attack you even while taking damage. Combined with the fact that your dodge roll is already only situationally useful and you can't cancel out of a regular combo chain, you're left in a situation where you either have to accept you're going to take extra damage or slowly, painfully, whittle away at the boss, attacking once or twice, then backing off, waiting for another opening, rinse and repeat. This stings doubly when most stages have a challenge for finishing off the stage without being hit, which feels like an uphill battle considering these limitations. Shredder's Revenge is a good game. I had a lot of fun with it. I think the love and care that went into crafting this game, both as an homage to the classic beat-em-up genre and especially the classic Ninja Turtles cartoon, the love is obvious. But as more of a fan of beat-em-ups in general than purely Ninja Turtles, I can't help but think of other titans in this genre like Fight and Rage, or even more so Streets of Rage 4, and see how much better that game plays. It still suffers from a lot of the same issues. A lot of these are just inherent to the design of this genre, but Streets of Rage 4 mitigates these issues a lot more elegantly. Instead of building extra systems to try and combat the jank of flying enemies with this camera setup, instead, there are just almost no flying enemies at all. Instead of a dodge row with limited usability, they instead have a super move that does damage on both sides of the character and grants iframes, rewarding players for being able to read enemy tells and lets them keep their position so they don't have to end up in a location that isn't as beneficial to them. These sort of things can go a long way to streamlining and simplifying some frustration moment to moment, even if the overall product still is really good. And don't get me wrong, Shredder's Revenge is really good. If you're a fan of either beat-em-ups or Ninja Turtles, you're gonna have a great time. I had a great time, but when I put my critical lens on and kind of examine it and how it compares moment to moment with some of my other favorite beat-em-up games, a genre I've loved ever since I was a little kid. The original Streets of Rage was one of the first games I ever played on a home console. I have to just reflect and realize that there are little tiny bits that are just more frustrating here in this game than they are in other contemporaries that I remember a fair bit more fondly.
Now, both Tom and I agreed that we should hit up our friend Jax to see what he thought of Shredder's Revenge and how it utilized the lore of TmnT. Was it effective? Was it clever? Or was it forced and bad? Let's find out.
Hi there! I'm your friendly neighborhood Jaxblade, and my friends Saber and Tom have asked me to come on and talk about Shredder's Revenge because I know a little something about TmnT, so let's get right into this. First things first, I gotta say that this game is not only a love letter to TmnT fans in general, but just to the 1987 show. There are so many little Easter eggs and cameos that I've noticed that I'm just like, bruh, I did not think that. So if you're just a casual TmnT fan going into this, there's gonna be a lot of stuff that you may see, oh, I really like that, but there's a lot of stuff you may be going, wait, what? So let me just break down some of those for y'all. For example, some of the OG voices do return. Like all of the OG turtles return, which is super great to hear because they were in the most recent 2012 Nickelodeon TmnT series, the CGI versions, where they all cameoed as themselves and came back as full episodes. They were just absolutely brilliant. I love those episodes. So hearing them again, hearing the OG cast just doing their old TmnT lines in this game, chef's kiss. Now, sadly, some of the voice actors did not reprise their roles. Either they have passed away or they just didn't get in contact in time, but I really love it. For example, rest in peace, James Avery, the OG voice of Shredder, aka Uncle Phil. Also, for new people out there, some major changes have happened to like certain characters. For example, the characters of April O'Neil, Raphael, and Casey Jones are all vastly different than their 1987 counterparts, though you may not notice this on the get-go. For example, April O'Neil in the 1987 show was never a martial artist. She never learned how to fight, but if you read the 1987 comic books, she did learn how to fight in those. But every time we talk about April O'Neil, this is one of the ones that just never learned that. She never learned any of this stuff, but now she is one of the most competent fighters in the game, which is something I actually really appreciate a lot because now she's up there with 2003 April O'Neil, 2012 April O'Neil, and Rise April O'Neil, who all are master martial artists at this point. Next, let's talk about Raphael. Now, 1987 Raphael was more of a sarcastic smartass instead of someone who was specifically designed to be angry. We all know Raphael as being the angry turtle, the edgy turtle and stuff like that. And whenever you see Raphael on the screen, he looks very angry, he looks pissed off, he looks like he's just like in a perpetual bad mood, which is something they've been adding to later Raphael incarnations as well, where when he appeared in the 2012 series, he was more aggressive than his, 1987 counterpart, which is funny because you see this game and you hear the lines coming from Rob Paulsen, who's voicing him, but this Raphael back in the day, he didn't even like fighting all that much. So I think that's really funny that they had this character acting this way in this game, which just adds to the, Raphael being the aggressive one, which is awesome, very powerful fighter and very great. And then we have 1987 Casey Jones in this game, who is very much like Casey in the 1990 movie and 2003 show, and says some of the lines that the 1987 Casey did, but 1987 Casey was just a spaz nutcase who sounded like Clint Eastwood as Dirty Harry. But this one is very clearly just like taking an amalgam of other Casey Jones and making it their prior personality. So I like how they've taken future TmnT character representations and put them into the 1987 cartoons cast, which is just phenomenal to see. Now let's get on to the villains of this game. Now, of course, you've got the well-knowns. You've got Shredder, you've got Krang, you've got Bebop and Rocksteady, but there's a lot of ones that you may not recognize if you didn't watch the 87 show, like for instance, Wingnut is in here, we got Tempestra back in here, and they even brought Toka and Razor in here because, fun fact, they actually made a cameo in one episode of the 1987 cartoon when originally they appeared in Secret of the Ooze. So it was just super cool to see them as like a mini boss fight. I love that aspect of this character. And then of course, you get the fun characters like Baxter Stockman. You fight a ton of his mousers and stuff like that, specifically the Fly Baxter Stockman, which is just super cool, like just to see that version around again, because we haven't seen that specific, the white version, because Baxter is black in every other interpretation, which I ain't stressing. But a lot of the villains come straight from the 1987 cartoon, so it's good just to see them getting their shine again. So if a lot of people are confused where they're from, go check out the 97 cartoon. Also, one of the coolest things about Shredder's Revenge is all the Easter eggs to not only the 1987 cartoon, but the previous NES Ninja Turtles game with like how certain characters react. They even put in the iconic or infamous April O'Neil line, "You have my support," when like you revive someone. Like, it's just crazy stuff like that. But also they have aspects from the live action movies with how like certain moves are performed, certain sayings, like, catchphrases that are coming, like Michelangelo's like, "I love being a turtle," the poses they do. They have certain screenshots that they mimic exactly when they do like a final move. Like for example, when Michelangelo is jumping down, spinning his nunchucks, that is clearly from the first episode of TmnT. Or when he does his combo move, where it's like straight from the intro of TmnT. But they do that with so many many other characters, especially when they get to the end credit scenes, which I love seeing. Like all these little aspects you just wouldn't think of. Like they even have like certain things with Shredder in the game, with like his appearance in the original games too, like on the TV screen. That is very clearly when he appears and talks to the turtles in the NES game. So much cool stuff like that. And then of course, you know, Super Shredder. His design is straight out of Secret of the Ooze at the very end of this game, which I love seeing. Like they made that design so intimidating, so much better than they did in that freaking movie. Overall, I think this game just has a ton of great stuff that any fan of TmnT, or just a fan in general of just like these type of games, would have a blast with, especially the multiplayer. The multiplayer is where this game shines, because that is a key thing about TmnT, is just the teamwork and family nature of it, and just whooping ass together. So I think this is just a fun time. You will have a blast playing it. Definitely check it out. But back to the video, and Saber and Tom, take them away. You know, you got this.
Overall, I consider Shredder's Revenge to be a good game across the board. Is it perfect? No, as both Tom and myself have some grievances with the game mechanics, but it's forgivable. Where the game really shines, though, is of course with its personality. Just a bunch of TmnT lore and Easter eggs and unapologetic charm. I always appreciate when a franchise doesn't shy away from its roots, and instead fully embraces what originally made it great. The world of TmnT is absurd, but fun. So go ahead and embrace the cheese. Turtle ninjas fighting other ninjas and anthro-villains while eating pizza off the ground and using their turtle blimp. The gameplay is solid, it has replayability, and above all else, we see genuine respect for the TmnT franchise. Shredder's Revenge is undeniably a love letter to both TmnT and the beat-em-up gaming genre, and I recommend it. I'm looking forward to trying out the other characters I haven't played as yet, like Master Splinter or April O'Neil. Yeah, I really want to play with April.
Wow, talk about embraceable. Who is that?
Hi guys, it's me.
Gosh, April, you look just like a girl.